Being a great leader is something many mid-career professionals aspire to be. Your leadership journey probably began with some kind of management function. You were identified as a high performer within your organization, and someone told you it was time to be in a leadership role. But we know that leadership is challenging, and it's not for everyone. But if you are in a leadership role or want to be in one soon, today's conversation is for you. Today, you will meet Beki Fraser. Beki joins me to talk about what an introverted skeptic is, how they lead, and how they impact change. Plus, what it means to be a servant leader, how to handle self-talk, how to be seen, heard, and acknowledged in any room or meeting, as well as some of the biggest leadership challenges and mistakes for 2023. Let's get started. Welcome to episode 150 of the Mid-Career GPS podcast. I'm your host, John Nerrill. I'm here with you each week to help you find a job you love or love the job you have by using my proven four-step formula. My friends, I am still recovering from whatever's been ailing me over the last few weeks. And while my voice is slowly coming back, I'm glad to bring you today's conversation I recorded a few weeks ago. Before we get to today's episode, I want to remind you that I've got a free career guide on my website called 5 Mistakes Mid-Career Professionals Make and Need to Stop Doing. You can get that guide on my website at johnnerrill.com, and you can also check the show notes. But I also want to acknowledge this is episode 150. So if you're new to the podcast, welcome. If you've been here for a while, thank you for always coming back and being such a loyal and faithful listener. But I would be truly honored if you enjoy this episode or podcast to grab the link to this episode and show and text it to 3 of your friends. I would be honored if you could share that with them. We know that word of mouth is a great way to promote something. And my loyal listeners, I am so grateful for you. You are such wonderful supporters and fans. I thank you so very much. So thank you all for helping me spread the word about the Mid-Career GPS podcast. Now, I've known Beki for a few years, and we both went through the same coach certification program, and we both coach with Next Up's Rising Stars program, and we're both authors. So when Beki told me that she had published her book, I wanted to have her on to discuss her vision of leadership and how she helps her mid-career clients along their leadership journey. Now, before becoming a business and leadership coach, Beki spent over 15 years in progressive human resources roles, leading and influencing across functions and international borders. Her experience ranges across industries, including pharmaceutical, insurance, software development, and more. Beki wrote her first book, C.O.A.C.H, The Introverted Skeptic's Guide to Leadership, to inspire leaders to integrate who they are with how they lead. Her work helps leaders navigate organizational change, cultivate trusting and influential relationships, and nurture positive acceptance for themselves and their teams. Beki holds a master's in public and private management. It's an MBA from the Yale University School of Management, focusing on strategy and leadership. She also holds a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Economics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Plus, she's a highly credentialed and certified professional coach, holding the Professional Certified Coach designation through the International Coach Federation. She's a certified professional coach through the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching, also known as IPEC, and an Energy Leadership Index Master Practitioner. I know Beki as an outstanding leader and coach, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to Beki Fraser.
My name is Beki Fraser, and I am a business and leadership coach. I've had my coaching practice now for about 8 years, Focus for Growth. And through that, I've brought a lot of the HR background that I'd had for about 15 years prior to that to the forefront. and able to really work with leaders to help them really integrate who they are with how they lead. And it's just been really an exciting shift from that HR background into that one-on-one group coaching and different kinds of training opportunities that I bring to the world through my practice.
Well, Beki, one of the things I appreciate about you so much is your HR background and how that really has fueled a lot of your career, but also propelled you into this coaching space and your coaching business in your new book. But of course, this is the Mid-Career GPS podcast. And I'm wondering if you could just take a moment and share with us what was a defining mid-career moment for you that has since changed or shifted the path of where your career is today?
We could probably talk all day about some of those that happened for me, but I'll just stick to one, I promise. So the one that was really quite pivotal was when I actually shifted out of my corporate life and into becoming a solopreneur and starting my own coaching practice. And I had just returned from an international assignment. I wasn't really fitting with the organization anymore because I had changed, but they had changed too. And it was sort of this weird dynamic that had happened. And I shifted into another organization because I thought, well, I will no longer have these responsibilities for doing these layoff spreadsheets and all of those things that as an HR professional, I had done too many times, to be honest. And it was really starting to drag my spirit down quite a bit. And meanwhile, when I made that shift, I'd also gone to a different HR role. And then also starting the coach training that I did with IPAC. And it was in my third module, actually, as I was in that coach training, where someone was coaching me as we were practicing the skills. And I thought, I'm about to go back from this particular meeting, and I am going to be doing a small layoff. So that thing I thought I was going to escape, I didn't. And so this means I need to make a more transformative kind of change so that I could live a little bit more along the path that was really meant for me now. HR had offered me a lot of really great things. I'd learned some really fabulous skills. It's just that's not where I was headed anymore. And it was time to turn the direction and recalculate that direction a little bit.
Well, from someone who's gone through IPEC as well, and I can certainly attest to that, Mod 3 is a powerful, powerful weekend in terms of figuring out what we do with our careers and whether we take the coaching back into our organization or if we're thinking about starting a practice. And for you, what's really interesting here is not only did you pursue this solopreneurial route, but one of the things that not a lot of people do is they go ahead and they publish a book. And you published this book called C.O.A.C.H, the Introverted Skeptic's Guide to Leadership. And Beki, one of the reasons why I invited you on the podcast is that this year I am inviting several guests on the pod to really open up this larger conversation about what leadership means to them and how to help mid-career professionals be more impactful, or for the lack of a better phrase, better leaders. One of the things I know from people I've spoken with who listen to the podcast or are on my email list is that they realize how important leadership is. They also realize they don't want to screw it up. They don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to be the bad leader. And you approach this from this perspective about an introverted skeptic. And I'm wondering if you can just define for us, who is an introverted skeptic?
Yes, as you imagine, I get that question a lot. It is a description that I did coin myself. And an introverted skeptic is someone who maybe isn't really energized by being in large groups of people or chronically being in those back-to-back meetings. Their energy comes from being alone, being in small, trusted groups, and really taking that time to process information and really get their own perspective before they're necessarily speaking out and sharing with the class, if you will. What's tied into that is this skeptical perspective of, I want to understand why. Just because you told me to isn't enough, right? I need to understand as a skeptic, what is the long run goal that you're having me kind of line up toward? And so they tend to ask a lot of questions and get really curious. And they sometimes have this situation where it lands a little bit uncomfortably because then the other person is thinking, well, don't you believe me? Don't you trust me? Right. And it creates these different dynamics. So the introverted skeptic is someone who is really thoughtful, often a little bit on the quieter side, but has a lot of questions when they're talking to people. And so there's a lot of superpower that comes with those traits being combined. And at the same time, there's some commonality in terms of some of the challenges that they describe for me as their life experience as a leader.
And to tie in with that, you talk about servant leadership. So, as the author of this book, I'm curious, how do you define who's a servant leader?
So I think that really when it comes to servant leadership, it really comes down to even defining the leader role in general. And so many times I hear people talking about leadership and confusing it with management. Well, I've got people, and that's not necessarily the case. I often think about leaders as people who have an influence or an impact on others. And when we tie in and connect that to the service involved, that servant leadership component, it's really not looking out for what's in my best interest or even what's in the best interest of my team. It's actually more of a collective perspective of, how can I or we, if I happen to have a team, be more in service to those who are around me?
I like how you define that. And anybody who's listening, if they miss that, or you're in the car and you miss that because you're paying attention to the road, when you're safe, just go ahead and hit that back button for a few ticks to go back. Because I really do appreciate how you frame this idea of a servant leader, but also where there's a hybrid component of all these different traits and qualities with an introverted skeptic. And it's one of the things that makes your book truly unique. And there's another component to the book that I, as a as a reader, but also as a coach, really appreciated, was that you guide the reader along through these exercises or these reflections. And Coach U it stands for 8 very wonderful strategies. And I'd just like to know, how did you come up with the title of the book, and what specifically does Coach U stand for?
So it's funny. The title of the book was actually a bit challenging for me to come to. And I talked to several people about that, and we kept on throwing around, what is the common thread through the entire book? Because that's really how you want to title a book, is really about that. And suddenly, after way more time than it should have taken me, I came to the conclusion, this exercise that I invite people to do on a regular basis, is that the whole of the book chapters are structured as an arc mimicking a coaching conversation. Where are you starting? What do you want to think about? Where do you imagine you could be? And then what action do you want to take as a result of that reflection and insight that you might have gained in that process? And Coach U is intended to be a filter, in a sense, of what is going to keep me accountable, what is going to keep me motivated to take this action and take this step. So Coach U, as an acronym, there are, like you say, 8 different things where it's about confidence, creating that opportunity, so an opportunistic piece to what your action might bring. What is the awareness that it brings to you or to others? How does it help you build connections with other people? How does it prompt you to handle self-talk and really manage that piece of it? And then this other component of yak it up. Often my introverted skeptics are people who are not necessarily out there with the bullhorn talking about all the things that they do. And so how can this elevate their voice and get them heard in a way that maybe otherwise they wouldn't? And then the observations and being observant. And then the U is really that understanding emotion and how that can actually come into play in good ways. Because again, the skeptic often will think, well, I've got this all figured out rationally. That's all I need, right? And it's like, well, except for then why haven't you taken action?
Right. And as I was reading your book, and one of the things that I found to be an absolute anchor as I was reading the book was that the coach you traits or characteristics, if you will, pop up on these pages where it forced me. And as a reader, this is what I wanted. It forced me to think about these 8 strategies in how I was reflecting on whatever particular leadership topic you were talking about. We know there's a lot of books and a lot of blogs and resources that are out there that talk about the power of self-coaching. The way that you did this for me and for your readers, I believe was masterful because it just brought everybody back to this place to say, okay, where's the confidence piece? Where is the opportunity piece? How well are you aware? All of those things and the questions that really made me pause and not rush through reading your book. So well done.
Well, and thank you, because that's exactly what I wanted as that piece of it is don't just keep flowing through. Take that pause. Recognize what you've learned about yourself and how it can benefit you to take that step going forward. And so often we are running through, especially our working lives, but really it's all of our lives. And it's
Yeah.
this opportunity for us to take that pause. And it doesn't need to be a long one. And it doesn't need to be, well, I gained something in each of these 8 different areas. I'm very specific about just where does it? It isn't how many times, you don't have to check all the boxes. That's not what it's about.
I love that. And so I wanted to take some time to get your thoughts on the idea of handling self-talk. So it's one of the things that along the mid-career journey is people are typically a little bit more into their leadership career or path, but we're talking about people that are holding titles, say from manager to senior director. They continually want to level up. They have aspirations for executive or C-suite level positions. Talk with us a little bit about the importance or the power of handling self-talk.
The importance side of it is even having the awareness of what you are saying to yourself. And again, because we don't always stop and take that moment to reflect on, is that my thought? Is that a thought that I have made up potentially about what someone else believes about me? And really creating those stories around that, because that's really what we're doing in a lot of that self-talk is we're creating a story that guides us down a particular path. So the power of handling that self-talk is that we get to choose. I talk to my clients on a regular basis, and many of them are in that mid-career space, but this is actually true for executives as well, where you get it so much in your head around this is who I'm supposed to be, this is how I'm supposed to be, that you let go of just being who you are. And the more that you can embrace that and recognize there are many different stories that you can tell yourself, so tell yourself the one that helps you.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I had a coach years ago say to me, be careful what you say to yourself because it just might come true.
And how often does it that we
Oh,
manifest that because we keep on thinking, well, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. And then all of a sudden we're like, well, see, that's what happened. And I've talked to my mother-in-law actually about the nature of worry. And I was teasing her at one point in time. And I said, worry is like a rocker. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere. I had seen that as a quote somewhere, and that one really stuck with me.
That is so good. I'm going to
Isn't
remember
it?
that one. That is really, really good. Yeah. Yeah. As a kid who worried his entire life, an adult who's trying to break himself of it, that is really, really good. Yeah.
Yes, I am right there with you.
So, Becky, let's dig in a little bit more specifically. There is a chapter in your book called "Be Heard Even When You Whisper." And this one particularly resonated very strongly for me because we think about how do we find our voice? How do we show up in a way that we're adding value and adding to this importance? And I want to share with you, but also for our listeners, a particular quote from this chapter and would love to get your thoughts on the other side of it. So obviously, so we do this over Zoom. I don't release the video, but like Becky's looking at me with this intense curiosity of like, oh no, what part is he going to read here? What's the
Sentence
big
he's
thing,
pulling
right?
out?
It's all I love doing this with authors though, because they never know where I'm going to go into the book. So it's again, it's from the chapter on Be Heard Even When You Whisper. This is what Becky wrote. More frequently, you are in a team meeting or giving a presentation to senior leadership or the board of directors. You may or may not know the audience individually, and the evaluation of what you do may feel sharper. Let's be honest. Views of your performance and ultimately your compensation is heavily influenced by those in that room. Those quote unquote front of the room moments are about creating the optimal impressions and relationships with those you may not interact with regularly. I chose that quote, Becky, because it's something many mid-career professionals experience. That moment where they're in that front of the room or they're the lead screen in a virtual meeting and they're told to lead the presentation or command the room in some way, and eyes are on them that they had never had before. And so I'm curious just to hear from you when you hear that quote back about what is it that the servant leader or the introverted skeptic rather, um, thinks about or hears when they want to get their voice heard in that kind of platform or arena.
Well, I think it kind of ties back to what you were talking about with the self-talk, really. Because going into that room, you can choose to believe that they're all out to get you and they're looking for all of the reasons that they will condemn anything that you say. Or you have an opportunity to walk in there virtually or literally and have the perspective that these folks are curious and it's why they've invited you in to talk with them in the first place. And they're curious about what you want to have them know. What is the information that you're sharing? And so there's this cycle of I'm supposed to know everything versus I know what I know, and they can help me identify what it is that I need to look into in addition to that. So there's this flexibility and this freedom to be able to say, what's the fear I have about walking into that situation? And how can I turn that into a statement or a belief that actually supports me feeling better in front of that room? Again, it's a story you're making up anyway. You might as well make that story serve you. And then reality turns out to be what it is. Yes, you might have someone who is critical of you. And the question then that I ask is, how much is that about what you presented versus where they were at that point in time? And so one of the things that I talk about in the book too is, okay, so they're not listening to you. Is that about you or is that about them? And so some of these different ways to look at that situation so that it feels less threatening, so that when you walk in, your confidence is higher, your awareness of what you can be listening for might shift, and really moving more comfortably into these conversations because they're just people.
Yeah. Right. They're just people. It's scary and comforting all in the same breath.
Yes.
Yeah. There was something I believe later on in that chapter, though, you talk about the importance of standing out in the crowd because if you blend in, you can become invisible. And for leaders, we know it is that calling. It is part of the servant leadership you talk about where they have to stand out. They have to stand out and stand up for what they're doing and advocating for their project, their team, whomever that is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. And especially this is true for many people. And this is true throughout the book. I write it with the introverted skeptic in mind. And yet I've gotten feedback from people who say, I am about as extroverted as you can imagine. And I still found a kernel or two that I could take. I'm open to taking things on face value. And yet, wow, yeah, you gave me some questions that maybe I should be asking myself. And in this situation, I think that one of the key elements for an introverted skeptic in particular is maybe if I don't say anything, they won't even notice and I won't do something wrong, right?
Yep.
And then the worst thing possible happens is that they don't get to know what you know. You're not heard. And so now all of the things that you wanted them to understand and know are missed because you didn't stand out, because you didn't really push yourself to really amplify that message. So, really, what it comes down to is when you're a little different, and I've always been, a bird of another feather. So I know what I'm talking about here. When it comes to standing out, even if it's just a little bit, to create a memory for them, then it's not just the memory of you, it's also the memory of what you said that can really resonate and be held by that person. You don't need the bullhorn. You don't need to make it big and loud. All you have to do is find a way to be memorable.
Oh, that is so good. That is so good. And I think for anybody listening who has those kind of fears or concerns, how do I want to be memorable? That's Beki, that is so good. So I'm curious from you. Here we are in the mid part of 2023. We're in quarter two. Maybe the end of quarter one, the more I think about it, depending on when this drops. I don't have my planner in front of me. What's the biggest mistake mid-career leaders are making in 2023?
Yeah, this is actually another chapter that that I think about, and that is that they are so busy doing that they aren't focused on where they can be leading, and really recognizing that they are part of creating the direction for the work that they are doing. And so and the way that I describe it in the book is really a metaphor with dancing. And if you're so busy looking at your feet, you stop listening to the music. And so the corresponding perspective on that from a leadership perspective is you're so busy in the details that you're forgetting the strategy and the direction that things are going. And as a mid-career leader, typically you have way more say about that direction than what you give yourself credit for, or you raise your voice to share.
So, given that you have identified the biggest mistake mid-career leaders are facing in 2023, what would you say is the biggest challenge they're facing for this year and moving forward?
Wow, I think the biggest challenge from my perspective is the complexity of the work environment right now. Everything that perhaps you felt was stable at some point in time may not always be so. And that shows up differently in different industries and in different leadership capacities. But that challenge is not only for how do you keep yourself centered and focused and motivated to do the work that you are engaged in doing, but how do you connect with other people in ways that are comfortable or maybe a little stretch for you so that you're minimizing the impact of that complexity and kind of finding that path going forward. That can be, what kind of workplace are you in? What kinds of projects are you taking? What are you doing with the organizational design that you have for your team or beyond that team? The questions are numerous, and it's being selective about which of those challenges do I want to take on, and how do I ensure that people are willing and interested in following me?
That's really good. Because if we have learned anything over the last 3-4 years, is that expect the unexpected. Things are going to change.
Absolutely. And there's never perfect information. There is never a perfect answer. And really, how annoying are perfect people anyway, in some respects? So, be spicy, be wrong every now and then.
I love it. That's so good. Well, Beki, it is time for us to start wrapping up here. And so as we do, I'd love for you to share with everybody, what is your best advice to help someone build their mid-career GPS?
To me, I think it's really do the work to know yourself, know what you want for you, and then start noticing the people who are around you and how you can be in service to them, or they might be in service to you. So really kind of going to that grounding place of, don't do it because you've always done it. That keeps you on the path that you've been on. Instead, really notice where you are, what you've learned, and where you would choose to go if there were no bounds, there are no barriers to that. And really dream the dream and see if there's a way to find at least a piece of that.
Well said. Beki, I'm going to turn the mic over to you. I'd love for you to take a moment and just share with everybody how they can connect with you, where they can find your book, what you have going on. My friend, the mic is yours.
Well, thank you for that. It's been a pleasure to talk with you as always today. So thank you for the invitation to come in and talk with you today with the podcast. And in terms of following up and being connected with me, certainly my invitation would be to connect me. LinkedIn is primarily the social media that I'm on. And so certainly feel free, reach out and make a mention. Let me know that you are a listener to John and that is the source of it. And also you can check out my website. It is Focus for Growth. 4 is the word, not the number, focusforgrowth.com. And you'd be able to find me there, and you'd be able to find my email address and even a contact page. And in fact, if you're interested in having a bit of a conversation about a leadership challenge that you're faced with at this point in time, or just kind of curious about what possibilities might be out there for you, there's even a way out on my website where you'd be able to schedule 30 minutes of my time just to kind of get to know each other and chat a little bit. And specifically also, one of the things that I'm having out on the website too is that if you've got that question about, am I really an introverted skeptic? There is also a way for you out on my website to be able to download a bit of a PDF and essentially take a bit of a quiz and see where you rank in terms of that introverted skepticism.
Well, Beki, I will make sure all of that is in the show notes, including a link to get your wonderful new book, C.O.A.C.H, The Introverted Skeptic's Guide to Leadership. You can find more information about it on Amazon, correct?
Yes, it's actually on both Amazon and Barnes & Noble online. It's easier to find on Amazon, but it's also available at Barnes & Noble.
Absolutely. And I'd be remiss if we didn't give a shout out to our friend and book publisher, Andrea Seidel at Live Life Happy Publishing, who was kind enough to publish your book as well. She published mine too. So it's always great working with Andrea. So if any of you are in need of a book coach, I will make sure Andrea's link is in the show notes as well. Beki Fraser, thank you so much for spending some time with us today on the Mid-Career GPS podcast. It's always a pleasure, my friend. We will talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Mid-Career GPS podcast. Make sure to follow on your favorite listening platform. And if you have a moment, I'd love to hear your comments on Apple Podcasts. Visit johnneral.com for more information about how I can help you build your mid-career GPS, or how I can help you and your organization with your next workshop or public speaking event. Don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn and follow me on social at John Neral Coaching. I look forward to being back with you next week. Until then, take care and remember, how we show up matters.